Welcome back to the Making Disciples podcast. So excited for our conversation today as we continue to talk about busting the expertise myth, the belief that excellent execution equals excellent ministry. We're going to talk all around developing and multiplying leaders in the church. And I've brought in one of my good friends, Mac Lake. Mac has been talking about leadership development in the church for decades now. In fact, he has greatly influenced me from afar and through our friendship to help me grow as a developer of leaders and to help that carry through our church. And so today's conversation, you're going to see there's so many connections to how we equip the church. Specifically, you'll see a lot around how we do D groups, those principles applying to what Mac is going to share with us on how you develop and then multiply leaders through an intentional and simple process. Over this conversation, we're going to look at the mentality that you need to multiply leaders, the structure that you need to see it spread across your church, and the process that helps multiply those leaders at every level. I'm so excited for our conversation today with my good friend, Mac Lake. Let's jump in. So excited for today's conversation with my good friend, Mac. And man, this is going to be an awesome conversation. Mac, we actually just got done having a similar one with your community and your multipliers community. And so excited to have you a part of our community and with our leaders here as well. And just a second, I'll let Mac introduce himself. But here is what I'm so excited is we always talk about equipping leaders. We always talk about not being the expert that's executing ministry, but to be the coach that is equipping our people. And I would say that Mac has been one of the most influential people in helping me grow as a leader in that. And so much of what the conversations we have and how we help churches do that now, there's principles that Mac taught me even before we knew each other personally, Mac, but early in ministry. And so excited for us to have a conversation around that today of equipping and how do we develop more leaders and multiply our impact beyond ourselves. So Mac, welcome to the podcast, man. So glad that you're here.
Oh, Vic, it's so good to be here. And like you said, you spoke to my community a few weeks ago, and Vic, they are still talking about it. They're still chatting around it in the community and loved it. So we need to have you back again for part two because, man, you whet their appetite and they are hungry for more. So we'll have you back again for sure.
I love that. Excited about it. Mac leads a consulting group called Multiply Group. He also has worked with NAM in the past, worked with Oxano in years, and just been in the space of helping develop leaders for years and years. And so excited for our conversation today. Ever since I've known you, Mac, you have been around this conversation of how do we develop leaders? And you've always been, how do we grow them? Because there's really a shortage in the church. Like anybody that I've talked to, I've never met that church that's like, oh yeah, we've got enough leaders. Oh, the leadership, we're great there. It's always a deficit. So as you have worked with churches, what have you seen? Why is there always a deficit in leadership? And what's the cause behind that?
Yeah, I felt it too when I was a pastor. I'd planted a church in Myrtle Beach. And Vic, I remember our church was growing really fast. And I remember saying, there's a leadership problem in the church. There's a leadership problem in the church. And then I woke up one day and realized there's not a leadership problem in the church. There is a leadership development problem in the church. The leaders are there. It's just we don't have the systems to really maximize what is there. And so I began to look at the whole problem differently and go, oh my goodness gracious. And so I think we feel that pain of I don't have enough leaders because the staff members are complaining. If it's a larger staff, if it's a multi-staff church, they're complaining that they need to hire more people. The smaller church that only has a single staff person, they're stressing out because they're like, man, my volunteers that are overseeing our ministries are carrying a lot of weight, and I'm scared they're going to burn out. And so we're fearful of all this. And so what I've discovered is we really don't have it's more of a system problem. We don't have a system for identifying how many leaders we need. And so
Mm,
what happens is we tend to guesstimate how many we need, and it remains an emotional problem that we feel this emotion of a shortage of leaders rather than a rational uh, uh, feeling of, okay, here's what I've done the math and I've determined how many we need. So I'll give you an example. I got a call from a small group director from a church in Atlanta, stressed out. Said, "Hey, I need your help. My pastor told me I need to recruit 30 more leaders, and I just don't know how I'm going to do it. I've got to do it by the next 2 months." I said,
mm,
30 more leaders. That's a lot at one time. Okay. So, let's run the math. And I began to run the math. I said, where'd he get 30 from? I don't know. She said, he just told me 30 new leaders. I said, okay. So I began to run the math. I said, how many do you currently have? What's the size of your church? What percentage do you want in small groups?
mm,
What's your average small group size? Blah, blah. All those numbers. You know how many new leaders she needed? Four. Four.
mm,
And he was pushing her to 30. There was no rationale around it whatsoever.
mm.
And if they would have gotten 30 new leaders, they wouldn't even had the people to fill those groups.
Right.
And
Right.
that's one system problem. And the other system problem is we're not looking early enough. So
Mm,
August and we go, oh my gosh, we need, more leaders. That's the wrong question. If you're saying how many leaders, if it's August and you're saying how many new leaders do we need for this semester, that's the wrong question. If it's August, you need to say how many new leaders do we need for the January semester, and begin to identify how many you need now. What's your shortage now, so that you can apprentice those over the next 4 months to be ready for the next semester. And then the third system problem is it is a leadership development problem, because you ask any church, what is your leadership development strategy? You're going to get one of two answers. We don't have one. Or this is organic, which means they don't have one. What we do is we help churches articulate their leadership development strategy in less than 30 seconds. So you cannot articulate it, it's not clear. And if it's not clear to you, it's certainly not clear to your people. So you're just not going to see multiplication happening.
Oh man, I love that. You get their leadership development strategy down to 30 seconds that they can say, this is how that happens in our church.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. I think if what you've probably already heard from Mac, and I would attest to this, is you helped Long Hollow, and we were meeting. Like, there's a lot of people that talk about leadership development from theory. There's few people that actually get down to the nuts and bolts and systems and what actually gets it traction. And so what Mac's hitting there with the systems, like, man, I've experienced that from you, Mac. I think what you do so well is, all right, how does this actually work? Like, hey, let's actually put in the plans, the systems to get this thing going. There was I was reading your new book recently, Super Multiplier, which it's awesome. I can't like I love the size of it. You and I were talking about that at
Yeah.
Exponential, and so it's like a short resource. And so I was looking at it. There's a line early on that somebody told you, said, Mac, you're a great guy,
Yeah.
but you're not a very good leader.
Yeah.
And I think as the story unfolds, like, I just think there's something to that, because you were executing ministry really well. Like, I know you, anything you do is gonna be done with excellence. And so in a lot of ways, I think you were being successful, but that kinda stopped you in your tracks and maybe redefined what leadership looks like. And so would love to speak more to that moment and maybe the difference between what it looks like to lead people and what it actually means to develop people.
Yeah. I was young in ministry at that point, and I was so enthusiastic, and I loved what I did. I was a youth pastor, and I
Mm,
loved leading, or, what I thought was leading. And what I thought was leading was actually doing. I
mm,
didn't realize I was a doer, not a leader. I held a leadership position, but I was behaving like a doer, not a leader. Yeah. So,
right.
for example, I would put on a killer youth event. I mean, it was killer, man. I mean, we would have the right environment and fun games, and the devotion would boom, it would land, and the worship was meaningful, and the food was really, really just what the kids wanted, all that sort of thing. And it was by the end of the night, everybody be crying, it'd be powerful and all that. Here's the problem. I'm the one that bought the food. I'm the one that created the environment. I'm the one that led the worship. I'm the one that did the devotion. I planned and led the games. I cleaned up afterwards. I was a doer, not a leader. And so I might have been good at executing, but I wasn't good at leading. And what I was
Mm,
defining as leadership was not leadership. And
mm,
so would have been much better. And eventually I learned, and because of that confrontation, that a couple sets of parents come in, sit me down, and they said, "Mac, we love you. You're a great guy. You're just not a good leader." And I thought, "What are you talking about?" "Well, I'm a great leader." And they described it, and I was like, "Oh, you're right. I don't do any of that. I don't involve anybody." And
mm,
and so, man, then I began to learn to delegate and get things done through people, but still that's not enough. That's a good leader that delegates and gets things done through people. But man, to be a developer, you delegate things for the sake of development,
mm,
and you make sure that you have somebody, one or two people apprenticing alongside of you, so that every single thing you do, it turns into a development opportunity. "Hey, watch me do this. Watch me do this. Let me explain why I did this." And
mm.
now, uh, as a good leader, you can model for somebody the leadership behaviors you want to see them develop.
That's right. I love that. Just connecting a couple of dots for our listeners. Like even our last week's episode in our podcast, we talked about redefining excellence. And so we so often fall into this expertise myth. And it's the belief that excellent execution equals excellent ministry. We think if I just excellently execute, but that's not how Jesus did ministry. And so Ephesians 4 is equipping the saints for the works of ministry, not executing ministry for the saints. And so I love that idea, just that moment. And I think if our listeners, I think there's probably those moments too that if we may not have had that person that's had the boldness to say what that person said to you, but I think many of us, if we did, that same thing could be said about us. Because I think it's so easy to have the wrong bar of excellence and think it's executing ministry opposed to equipping people for ministry. And so I love just that redefinition. When you think about for pastors today, ministry leaders, where maybe they are leading people well through their charisma, they're executing ministry well, why is that the default for us? And why is it hard for us to kind of get to the other side of that of not just executing ministry, but equipping others to do it?
Yeah, I think a lot of time it's not something that we do intentionally. I mean, I still do it today.
Yeah.
I'll go off and do something and go, "Oh, I could have had somebody watch me do that." It
Mm,
so it's like a new default setting that we have to set in our brain. And
mm,
because it's easier to do things ourselves, it's faster to do it ourselves. Now,
yeah.
sometimes there's the wrong motivation there. We're too controlling, to delegate and let go. But here's the big thing. When we fail, when it's our default, when doing
Mm,
default, and we don't develop others, we are being so short-sighted, because here's the way I like to put it: leadership development is insurance. Okay. You would
mm,
never dream of leaving your house uninsured. Your house catches on fire, it burns down, you are in trouble. Okay. But there's a lot of leaders who do not have leadership insurance. In other words, they're not developing 2 to 3 people to do what they do. And then all of
mm.
a sudden they're knocked out of their role for one reason or another. Guess what? That ministry in essence burns to the ground.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, it's what I call the transition dip. The quality and quantity of ministry goes down because that leader's no longer in a position. There's nobody to pick it up and carry and do what they do. That falls on
Mm,
people who don't know. It just becomes a mess. And
yeah.
so you would never dream of not having insurance on your house. So why would I allow myself not to have insurance on my ministry? So what
Mm,
to do is always be developing 2 to 3 people to do what you do. They may not be your successor. And I tell people, never talk about replacing yourself. Okay. Don't talk about replacing yourself. Talk about reproducing yourself. It's not your
mm.
to replace yourself in most cases, okay? Unless you're the senior leader. In most cases, it's not your job. If you're a staff member underneath somebody else, it's not your job to replace yourself. It's your job to reproduce yourself so that your boss has options to choose from, okay?
Yeah.
And so a lot of people find it threatening when you tell them, "Hey, I need you to replace yourself." That,
Mm.
that that's a blow to their ego. So don't tell them that. Just say, "Man, I want to ensure that this ministry continues strong and well beyond your tenure here." And so, who are the 2 to 3 people that you're developing that can step in and do what you do?
Hey, church leader, I want to take just a moment and tell you about an exciting opportunity for you. Most churches have a passion for multiplication, they just don't know how to do it. Pastors have this disciple making burden, but their vision and strategy for it just aren't working. After 17 years and working with over 4,000 churches, our team has found many ways to help the church better make disciples. We call this our Movement Ready Church process. It helps your church create a disciple making culture, vision, and strategy that fits your unique context. It fits your church size, your community, your leadership style. If you want more information about our Movement Ready Church process, you can grab the book, Movement Ready Church, at any place that books are sold. Also, you can join us for any of our Movement Ready trainings. We host one-day trainings all across the country, and we have a virtual on-demand course that you can go through as a team. So if you're ready to see multiplication take off at your church, just go ahead and grab the leader notes in this show, and you'll see all the links to what I've mentioned and more. Now, let's get back to the episode. You said something just earlier too. You said delegating task, that's a start, but that's still not quite developing leaders, at least the way that you see it now. When you think about a leader that is a multiplying leader, somebody that's developing others, what does that look like? What's the simplest way to maybe define that or know if we're actually being a leader that's developing other leaders?
Yeah, I would push that even a little further, based on my new book
Yeah.
is super multiplier. And
Mm.
so I'm going to define super multiplier.
Yeah.
And Vic, this hit me. I was driving down the road one day. I was listening to a health podcast. Sean Stevenson had a guest on, some doctor, and the doctor asked Sean a question. He said, "How many people do you think are over 100 years old today, that are alive today, that are over 100?" And Sean said, "Wow, I don't know. Worldwide,
Mm.
25,000?" And he said, "No, it's over 300,000." He said, "But there's a difference between people. There's 2 categories of people that are over 100. There are those who are over 100. You look at them and you go, they're over 100. You could tell they look and the way they act and they feel like it. But then he said there's this second category of people that he calls super agers. And super agers are people who are over 100 years old, but you wouldn't know it, man. They got energy, they got vitality, they're horseback riding. I've watched it. I watched one the other day. He ran a 100-yard sprint. I'm just trucking down the track, and you're going, wow, this is unusual to see somebody over 100 living like this with this energy, vitality, and this health. I turned the podcast immediately. I turned it off immediately. And I was like, oh my gosh, Lord, that's what you've created me to create super multipliers. It's
Mm.
the usual category of multipliers. There are people who are multipliers, but I want to go beyond that. I want to
Mm.
see super multipliers. These are people who don't just reproduce leaders, they reproduce leaders that reproduce leaders 4 generations deep. So when I pulled the
Okay.
car over, I wrote a definition. A super multiplier is a leader who intentionally develops leaders who in turn develop others, creating a ripple effect of 4 generations of multipliers and catalyzing transformation that outlives them.
Mm.
Many people will never meet that 4th generation of leader that's reproducing.
Right.
But the goal is not just to reproduce leaders. That's too short-sighted. I
Yeah.
want to leave a legacy. So I want to begin to intentionally pour into leaders and develop leaders, but expecting them and equipping them to develop more leaders so that multiplication effect continues.
It's
And
good.
we see a new category multipliers that I'm calling super multipliers.
That 4 generations, is that connected to Second Timothy 2:2, or is that a different principle? Why 4 generations?
Yeah, it is connected to Second Timothy 2:2,
Yeah.
and there's a word in that verse that many people overlook, and that's the go-to verse about multiplication, okay?
Yeah.
But what Paul's not just talking about multiplication here, he's talking about a super multiplier. If you really
Mm,
look at the language, because he
mm,
says, Timothy, the things you have heard from me, okay? And that Greek word means to have heard, processed, digested, and applied to your life. So, in other words, the things that you heard from me that transformed your life, okay,
yeah.
those things I want you to entrust to reliable men. Okay. And that word entrust means to serve up a meal.
Mm,
Okay. And I always say
mm,
that you can cook up some really good leadership development, but they have to choose if they want it, right? I can't
mm,
feed them leadership development, but boy, I can cook up a leadership development experience that smells good and tastes so good that it makes it irresistible, right?
mm,
And so when we got 3 generations, but here's the clue, here's the super multiplier clue in that verse, that are able to teach others also. So he's
mm,
not saying he's telling Timothy, "Listen, man, you're the pastor of the church at Ephesus. You don't just develop anybody. You're not just
mm,
a multiplier. I need you to be a super multiplier." So that means when you go to choose people to develop, I need you to choose reliable men who will find others who are able to teach others also.
mm.
So don't just go develop anybody. When you're at a higher level of leadership, don't just develop anybody. Find people who you go, I know this person will be a reproducer, not just a lead.
Mm. That's good. Okay. I think there's probably some people in here who have a heart for equipping leaders, have a heart for multiplication, that maybe unintentionally are developing leaders, but not developing multipliers. And that they're developing, it's not getting 4 generations in. I could see that even in my own leadership potentially. Like,
Yeah.
so what's the biggest difference, or maybe what are maybe the better way of asking is, what are some of the ways that maybe we develop leaders, but not multipliers?
Yeah. So when we're developing a leader, we really are. We're pouring into them. We're being intentional about it. And so here's the way. Here's the way I say you in the book. Say here's how you develop a leader.
Yeah.
Okay, four part process. I want first. I want to get them to think about a specific leadership competency. Then I
Mm,
want them to try it. And then I want to get together and talk about it. And then eventually I want them to train others. So it's that
mm,
14 process. Okay.
mm,
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to find 2 to 3 people, just to make this simple. I'm going to find
mm,
2 to 3 people and say, I'm going to begin to intentionally develop you from one level of the leadership pipeline to the next. So it might be saying, hey, in my small group, I'm going to find some group members and I'm going to train them to a small group leader. Or maybe I'm going to look around and go, hey, I got a couple of small group leaders. I want to raise them up to be a small group coach. So I've got to determine who are my 2 to 3 people and what level I want to train them to.
mm,
Once I know the level, then I say, okay, what are the competencies at that level? And so let's say that I'm going to train 2 people how to be a small group leader. All right. So first competency is, let's say that I want to teach them how to facilitate discussion.
mm,
Okay. So I'm going to say, watch me. I want you to think about this. So I want you to watch me facilitate discussion and read this chapter from Leading Others on how to facilitate discussion. So they're watching me, they're reading the book. Now, we've done that. And I said, now, I want you to try it next week. I'm going to give you 2
mm,
questions from our small group time, and you are going to facilitate 2 of those questions. And then we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about, what did you see me do well? What would you have done different? What stood
mm,
out to you from that chapter that you read? All right. What did you do well? What would you do different? We're going to debrief that. We're going to process that. And then we'll go to the next competency, which might be how to build biblical community. And then the next
mm,
one, how to lead different personalities. And so
mm,
over time, I disciple them having them think about a specific competency, try it on their own, to get together and talk about it. And once we've done
Mm.
that repeatedly and they've got it, then I say, now I followed a 4T process with you. It's time for the fourth T. I want you to do exactly what I did with you. You're going to do that with two more people. Here's
Yeah.
what Paul told Timothy. I think it's 2 Timothy 1:13. He said, follow the pattern of teaching that I gave you. That
Mm.
word, it means template. It meant like the foundation, a blueprint or a foundation of a house. Paul was saying, I gave you an intentional process to follow.
That's right.
Just follow that. And this is why we don't see multiplication happening, because
Mm.
we're utilizing intuitive leadership development instead of intentional leadership development. So we aren't giving people a pattern to follow. And so now we're just saying, I need you to develop leaders. And they're going, I don't know how. You've not
Mm.
given me a pattern. And you just did intuitively. And I'm not an intuitive developer.
That's
So
good.
that's why we have to give people a template and a pattern to follow so that they can turn around and reproduce it. If we don't, we're never going to see that multiplication effect.
What I love about that is, Robbie challenged me one time early on when we were still at our church in Louisiana. He said, if you're not happy with the results you're getting, remember that you are perfectly designed to get the results you're getting. You're
Yeah.
perfectly designed to get the results you're getting. And I think it's just a moment for us to kind of look internally. What is our development process? What is our system? And so you just use that 4T model. So it's think, it's try, it's talk, and then it's train. Similarly, we have a version of it. We just say the multiplication cycle, and you've got to have a multiplication vehicle that's running that cycle. And it's very similar. It's model, explain, apply, develop. And so very similar, but it's all around the idea of like it has to be active learning. It has to include coaching and feedback, and then it has to multiply to the next generation.
Yeah.
And I think either way, it's what you see with Mac or even with our multiplication cycle, there's a process, and it doesn't really matter. You can use either one of those. They're very similar,
Yep.
but if you don't have a place where that's happening, we can't be upset if we actually aren't seeing leaders developed.
Exactly. And one of the most common ones I hear people use today, and I'm not bashing this one. I'm just saying it's the most popular. Okay. It's the most popular. It's the one you hear about the most. People aren't using it correctly. Okay.
Mm,
It's the I do, you watch, uh, I do, you help, you do, I help, that one. Okay.
right.
That's a good model, but people aren't using it right. And so what they're saying is, uh, people say that's what I'm doing. Okay. Well, when you're in the stage of I do, you watch, what are they watching?
Mm,
I've never heard anybody tell me.
that's right.
Well, watch me preach. Okay. You're going to watch me preach. And then, you know, okay, well, that's a big competency. Yeah.
Right.
I would rather say, hey, okay, if we're going to use this model, I do, you watch. Okay, Vic, I'm going to preach this week. I want you to watch me do the introduction. Okay. I
Mm,
want to teach you how to do an introduction of a sermon. You have my permission not to listen to the rest of the sermon. Turn me off after the first 5 or 6 minutes.
mm,
I want you to spend the rest of the sermon sitting there thinking about my introduction, what I did well, what you would do different.
mm,
How was it laid out? How did it get their attention? All those sort of things. And then we're going to meet afterwards. We're going to talk about it. Okay. And
mm,
then in a few weeks, the next week, I might say, now, Vic, I'm preaching on this passage. I want you to write an introduction, but you're not going to preach it. All right.
right.
You're going to practice writing the introduction. Okay. A few weeks later. All right, Vic. Now I'm preaching this sermon. You're doing the introduction.
That's right.
Okay. You're going to get up. You're going to do the introduction. Then you're turning it over to me. We're co-preaching. Okay.
Mm,
But you don't hear people do that. It's like, okay,
right.
Vic, watch me preach, and then you're up next time. And
That's
that's
right.
too massive of an approach. It intimidates and overwhelms them.
That's right. No, I love that. So I think that would be a action step for anybody. Do you have a process for development? Do you have a place where the 4 T's are happening or where the multiplication cycle is happening? Is there a place for that type of environment that's developing those leaders? Something else you said in there that I thought was really that Mac, I know because we've worked time and time together, but some of our audience may not know, some of our listeners, your leadership pipeline. And I reference you all the time when I'm working with churches, because what I often find is that when we get to the leadership level of their pathway, it's usually fuzzy.
Yeah.
So, like, we get to a team and we get there, and I'm like, "So tell me, who's a leader?" And it's like the kids team has, not only do they have their own language, it's like, well, this person's totally a leader, and the guest service person's like, well, this isn't a leader, but they hold a door. And what happens is their volunteer structure, there's they they count all the volunteers, but they don't weigh them. They don't know,
Mhm.
they don't actually measure the level of responsibility that they have.
Yeah.
And the span of care with volunteers is usually something just ridiculous. One person is over 50 people.
Yep.
And so I find teams always at that same place. And my go to is like, let me show you Max leadership pipeline structure. And that usually helps people get started of like seeing a better way of approaching volunteering and of being able to name and develop leaders. So could you just give us a quick summary of that leadership pipeline, and maybe how somebody could, if they're feeling what I just shared, how they could maybe go further with that with one of your resources?
Yeah. Yeah, the resources, the multiplication effect, my book, The
Mm,
Multiplication Effect, explains every aspect of the leadership pipeline. Another term for it is leadership pathway. I like that term in the
mm,
church world, leadership pathway. But basically, it says that every organization needs a structure, and it is a developmental pathway. And it starts with leading yourself, and this is your people who are attending your church, it's people who are serving in your church, people who are in small groups. And from that group of people, some of those flow up to lead others. That becomes
mm,
your guest service leader, your small group leader, worship leader, that sort of thing. And then some of those, not many, some of those flow up to lead leaders. And these become volunteers who are overseeing 3 to 5 leaders in that area of ministry. That way, your staff person who's leading a department, which is level
mm,
4, that staff person doesn't have 50 people reporting to them any longer,
mm,
because now they've decentralized this and they have volunteer coaches or coordinators overseeing those leaders and working with those leaders. And so that fourth level is lead a department that's leading children's, students, groups, worship, guest services, outreach.
mm,
And then the final level is that leading the organization. That's the senior pastor, the executive pastor, those sort
mm,
of. And so it becomes a development pathway. The wisdom of this pathway is you can't let people skip levels.
mm,
If you let somebody who's a small group leader all of a sudden become your small group director, then they've jumped over a level and it's undermined their development because they never learned how to lead leaders. And
mm,
so it just there's so much wisdom around this pathway. So if you build a structure around it, not only does it give you a logical development pathway to disciple people into leadership, and this is why I wrote the series, the Discipling Leaders series. There's a discipleship book for each level of this
mm,
leadership pipeline. But the other thing is, when you begin to put the names of people, like you were saying, I love how you said that. It's they might count their people, but they don't weigh their people.
mm,
Uh, when you begin to put, okay, here's who we have at team member level. Here are the names at the leader level. Here are the names at
mm.
coach level. Here are the names at the director level. You begin to do that sort of thing. Now you see how deep your bench is.
That's
Uh,
right.
Vic, several years ago, well, many years ago, I was chaplain for the high school football team, and the coach was frustrated, and he threw a piece of paper, and it floated out on the field. It was a laminated piece of paper. I ran out there and grabbed it, and I looked at it, and I said, it changed my ministry because it was his depth chart. It one side it said offense and had all 11 positions with the names of everybody that could play that position. I flipped it over, had defense, all the positions and names of people who play
Mm,
the position. So I took that piece of paper back, I Xerox copied it, I gave it to my staff. I said, guys, from now on, I want to have your depth chart for your area ministry. I need it
mm,
by this Friday, and we're going to update it once a month. So once a month, they had to show me, well, every ministry, who their team members were, who their leaders were, who their coaches were. They were the director, and who was moving off of that team, who was moving on it, who were the prospects they were looking at recruiting onto that team.
Mm,
What that is a game changer.
that's
Most
right.
churches, they get a budget report, they track their money, they get a budget report every month. But I ask churches all the time, how many of you get a people report every month? And not one
Mm,
person's ever raised their hand. Here's the
mm,
question: what's the more important asset, your money
wow.
or your people? Then why in the world aren't you managing your people the way you are your money? If we managed our money the way we manage people, we'd go bankrupt in a year.
Mm. It's so good. I love that. I would say if you're looking for a structure for leadership development in it, that pipeline is a great place to start. And so we use it at Long Hollow. I was actually it was fun just this week. I'm leading our marketplace ministry development. So we're developing a new ministry helping marketplace leaders be able to make everyday work kingdom work and to make disciples in the workplace. So we're working with all these business leaders to create this ministry. Well, sure enough, our missions pastor says, "Hey, as we start this, I need a leadership team. We call them coaches." And so I need a group of about 4 coaches who will lead our leaders who will then reach the members of this ministry. And he said it so naturally. He was like, and just did the whole structure. And that language goes across all our departments. And what you saw in that moment, our missions pastor is like, okay, our people are developing this ministry. Our people will continue to run this ministry. And he has a structure in place that he is working with those 4 business leaders as coaches who are then helping guide the ministry forward.
Yeah.
And
That's
so,
so good. And you know what? So a lot of smaller churches, 80 to 120,
that's
they
great.
feel like, oh, that we don't need that. That's too much for. No, it's not. It's essential. And
That's
I've
right.
seen churches at that size get better traction with leadership development than any mega church I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
Once they put the structure in place, and they really began to get intentional about leadership development. The leadership pipeline stuff applies to small churches, or what I like to refer to as
Yeah.
normative sized
That's
churches.
right.
Uh, it applies to them just as much as a large mega church.
Yeah. Well, and I would say too, and I think you may have said something similar to this to me years ago, Mac. So I may just be reciting back your words, but we have to realize that volunteering and leadership development is about activating an individual's potential even before it is alleviating an organization's pain.
Exactly. Exactly.
And even if you're a church and you're like, I'm getting everything done, okay, what else could you get done if you elevated somebody and you stepped into your calling? But then what are the blessings of God that your people are missing out on because you won't develop them?
Yeah.
Like, what if you did find that 1 or 2 volunteer and have them step into that role? Well, then we're gonna actually see people use their gifts, and you're gonna see greater fulfillment, greater joy, and the truth is a lot of times what I found, they do the job better than I did.
Oh, absolutely. Here's the threatening thing. We've discovered this as we've worked with churches and helping them build out their leadership pipeline. The level that's missing is that level 3, that coach level. Most
Mm,
churches do not have it. They don't use it, regardless of the size. They don't have it, and they don't use it. Now, once we're working with them and we identify how many coaches they need in each of the areas, and they begin to put those people in and really empower them. And what we tell them is very, very important. When you move somebody from leader to coach level, you are increasing their scope of spiritual responsibility.
mm,
The mistake most churches make is they move somebody to that coach level and they give them administrative responsibility. Take
mm,
the role, communicate things, show up early, make sure everything's set up and clean, schedule and planning center. That's no, that's demoting somebody to be
mm,
serving a leader. That's not allowing them to lead leaders. I want them to lead leaders. So what happens, we get them in that position, and all of a sudden those people are empowered, and they
mm,
begin to act empowered, and they begin to ask questions. They begin to evaluate. They begin to bring you ideas. And some department leaders can't handle that.
Mm,
because they want control. They want to make the decisions. They want to be the sole owner. And all of a sudden, they got 2 or 3 people under them that's going, "Hey, I got an idea how to make this better." And their ego takes offense to the evaluation and the input.
mm. That's so good. I love that. We have talked about the mentality of a super multiplier. We talked about the leadership development process through the 4T model. We talked about the structure of the leadership pipeline. We've covered a lot of ground. I want to come back to that idea though of the mentality of a super multiplier as our kind of final question here. When I hear that, it feels a little intimidating. What would be your encouragement to a listener that's sitting here who is knows that that ought to be what they should do? That's a good thing. Maybe it's a little intimidating, but what would be a simple step that they could just start doing this week to begin to step into that super multiplier mentality?
Yeah. If you're a multiplier and you're developing a couple of people, then the simple next step is to say to those, 1 or 2 people that you're developing in leadership, "Let me show you how I'm developing you so that you have an intentional process because I want you to continue to multiply others." Vic, the discipleship group I have right now, session 1, when I met with them, "Hey, guys, we're not gonna be meeting forever, okay? I'm expecting you guys to go off and start reproducing,
Mm,
leaders eventually yourself, lead your own group, and then, raise up your own leader." I let them know from day 1, and so the simple thing to do is from day 1, let them know, "Hey, man, I believe in you. I wanna pour into you, wanna raise you up and make you a better leader, but I expect you to do the same for others."
mm,
And then, man, even saying things like, "Gosh, you're carrying on the legacy. Somebody passed this on to me. You're carrying on the legacy of faithful men or faithful women."
mm.
Um, and then just helping them feel the weight of the importance of multiplication beyond
Yeah.
beyond themselves. I got a text, I think it was last year, and I got a text from a friend. And it was a picture, and it was very clear in the picture that there was somebody, the man in this picture, I couldn't see his head. You can only see neck down. It was very clear he was training 3 other people. You couldn't see
Mm,
their okay. And my friend Charles texted me this. He said, "Hey, I want you to see this. You developed me. I developed Steve. Steve developed, I forgot the name. And then this guy developed Jan. Jan is in Pakistan.
mm.
He is now
Wow.
reproducing leaders. And I just wanted to send you a picture. You can't see their faces, not allowed to see their faces, but I wanted to send you the picture of 5 generations uh,
Wow.
beyond what you're doing." I had no idea it would go to Pakistan eventually. And here's the cool thing. I'll never meet Jan. I will never meet those that Jan's developing. I don't even know the name of the guy that developed Jan. I know Charles and I know Steve's name, but beyond that, I lose track. But
That's
they're
right.
following. And they're using this very intentional process that I trained Charles in, and that he trained Steve in, and et cetera. And so, man, if you can make leaders when you make leadership development intentional versus intuitive, then it can become reproducible. And here's
Mm,
what I learned: when it's reproducible, it's unstoppable.
that's
But if
good.
intuitive, it's not reproducible. It's probably gonna end with you, and you might be a multiplier, but you're not gonna be a super multiplier.
Man, I love that right there. That's such a good place to finish with. And what I love is it when we think about a movement and multiplication and 5 generations over to Pakistan, you're like, that's so intimidating. That's so overwhelming. But ultimately, that's the power of multiplication, and the start of it is really simple. It's just investing in a couple of people,
Yeah.
and, we say similarly our degree process, like, people are like, "How do I see a movement? How do I see my culture change? How do I see all this?" Go find 2 or 3 people, and start doing with them and have them reproduce it with others.
And you know,
And
and you know
and
what?
it works.
It works, and here's one of the keys. I remember with Charles and several other guys on my team back then. The main question I would ask them after I developed them, the main question I would ask them on a quarterly basis: Who are your two? Who are your
Mm,
two?
mm,
And so I wanted to see the two that they were raising up to do what they did, and it was really cool because once a quarter we would put the names of their two on a board. And then
wow.
it would be a year later, all of a sudden, boom, oh wow, new leaders in that role. And a year later, oh, there's a couple more leaders in that role. There were people I remember looking at them going, I remember when we put your name on the board. You
So
weren't a
good.
leader, you were just a potential leader. Now you've become a leader of leaders or whatever it was, and
Wow.
it's really cool. But you got to ask them, continually ask those that you've developed, who are your two?
So good. I love that. And so from the get go, starting with it, keeping it simple so that it reproduces. Mac, thank you so much. Again, I always love anytime we have our conversation because I'm like, everything there, I'm like, yes, we say the same thing. Like, and it's so similar. So love your heart for multiplication, the way that you help leaders, what you've been in my life, and how you've helped Long Hollow and developing our pipeline. And so grateful for you. If leaders, you have a new book coming out, Super Multiplier,
Yeah.
and it is out as we have this podcast and this episode, so people can go and grab that. Would highly encourage it, as well as the other resources that Mac has shared. I've read them all. I've implemented them all. I have quoted them all at some point. And so Mac, if somebody is wanting to connect with those resources or connect with you, where would they go?
Yeah, multiplygroup.org. Can go there and connect with us, and all the resources are there. Of course, the resources are on Amazon.com as well. Get them a little more affordably from our website, but either place you can get the resources.
That's great. Thanks for all that you do. Thanks for the new book, Super Multiplier, less than 100 pages.
Yeah,
So, I mean, golly, knock that thing out in a day or a weekend and get busy putting it into practice in your ministry. So, Mac, thanks for today and look forward to our next conversations together, man.
good to be with you, Vic.